Welcome to another episode from Shadows to Strength podcast. I'm your co-host Tyson. If you have not already done so, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss another podcast episode. So today we are going to be talking about therapy. Now, I do have a guest on with me today. This is Casper Vatras. He is a registered psychotherapist and his company is Vatras Counseling and Psychotherapy. So Casper, can you please give us a brief introduction into what you do and why you do it?
So I'm a registered psychotherapist, or as many might prefer, I'm a shrink. I'm a therapist. I help people work on their mental health, their psychology, their behaviors, their thoughts, their feelings, their emotions. And I specialize in helping clients particularly understand it. So I take a pretty eclectic approach to my work, where I use a lot of evolutionary psychology, a lot of psychodynamics, and a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy. The kind of modus operandum of my practice is, how can you hope to change anything if you do not understand it? So I take a heavy approach to doing so. Yeah, that's the brief synopsis, I suppose.
I love that for the podcast to have a quote to start off. So that was a perfect starting quote for us. I love that. So how long have you been in the field?
I've been in mental health for over a decade now, and I've been working as a therapist for about 5 years, mostly in private practice. I believe private practice for 5 years, and I love it, man. I love it. I particularly like what I can do now, which is helping people at a very granular level, in a very intimate level, one-on-one. And while I did enjoy my work working with, different halfway houses, working with crisis lines, working in more broader nonprofit organization mental health, I really like what I can do now. It feels like I can really help people achieve what they want, which is, again, understand their behavior, cognition, psychology, and figure out what can be done about it.
I think one of the things I really liked about you, because of my history and my background, is when you and I got to talking and I mentioned that I had spent a decade behind bars, and you had told me that you worked with people in halfway houses and stuff like that. And of course that strikes a chord for me, and I wanted to know more, and your approach when it came to anxiety and like, because we've had some really good discussions at 613, depression and vices and addiction and so many things that I've struggled with, and that I believe a lot of my listeners struggle with and contend with on a day-to-day basis. We we've been really wanting to do this for a bit, and we've
hmm
had kind of an excited conversation. I know I had a really excited conversation with you this past week, and that was kind of figuring out where we'd go with this podcast. Now we're going to do a series here. So audience, don't worry. We might not be able to fit everything into this one, but there are going to be other ones scheduled with Casper. And I had asked him if he could do the consultation that he does. He does, I think, 2 consultations with your clients, right? When you start with them.
Consultation, but I stretch those things out. I can be a
Okay.
little long-winded, but life is short. It's better to cover everything than to have somebody enter, a first session with questions, not knowing what to do. So those free 15-minute consultations often blend to, 20-minute, half an hour, 45 minutes, which I'm often happy to do.
Okay. So I want to take the approach today, and this is why I didn't really want to script this too much. I want to take the approach today as I'm a patient. I'm a new patient and I'm reaching out to you. I'm struggling. I'm going to go with the struggles that I've dealt with, right? I've been struggling with the past, right? Which has led to a lot of depression, a lot of regret, and I have a lot of fear because of that. And I've run from that reality through vices, through coping mechanisms. So if I were maybe a client sitting right now about to have our first consultation, I would love for our listeners to have a bit of an insight on your approach and what is important for me to understand when it comes to what I'm dealing with.
So, this is a consultation, we'll say, so this is going to get a little long-winded, but I think there's going to be a lot of great information here. So I'm a very directive therapist, very direct, very structured, a very no nonsense, to put it nicely. A lot of my clients come into my consultations, into seeking out a therapist, without understanding or with preconceptions as to how therapy works. And There are a lot of guys who think therapy is just talking about things, talking about your feelings. There are a lot of guys who don't really understand the process at all. They just know that I have to go to a therapist. That's what people do. That's what my wife is telling me to do. That's what my girlfriend's telling me to do. And there are a lot of guys who are just completely twisted up, to put it nicely, with their behavior, with the way that they feel, the way that they think. And they observe themselves engaging in behavior that is extremely problematic, whether it's going to be reactivity, classic anger or shutting down, whether it's going to be anxiety, depressive symptoms, which is like just a general shutting down, with compulsive behavior and addictions issues, and so on and so forth. What I would do first, one of the first lines that come out of my mouth when I'm doing a consultation is helping clients understand that all of this can be understood. That I know my field gets a bad rap, and I'm one of the people who will support that. It should get a bad rap. I think there are a lot of practitioners who don't know what they're doing, and where therapy is just talking about feelings, where there is no structure. There is no trying to fix things. There's no trying to understand things. It's just, yeah, we'll process, we'll talk through. No homework this week, no homework any weeks. And this is a travesty. I think, to say something a little strongly worded here, I think that any therapist who is not giving homework is not doing a great job. I have to choose my words carefully here because I'm beholden to my college. I can't talk too much shit, but I think there are a lot of charlatans, is one way of putting it. Not all of them, and I'm not saying anyone in particular, but there are a lot of charlatans. So the first thing I like to say is your psychology, that's to say your behavior, your cognition, the way that you feel, the way that you interact with other people, this can be understood. And as men, women do this too. We all kind of do this, but I think men specifically, we like to understand how shit works. Excuse my language. When we look at a car, we understand that that thing works. Maybe we don't understand a lot about cars, but we understand, there's some explosions happening in an engine, and there's all kinds of other systems, a carburetor, an alternator, and all this other stuff that makes it do what it needs to do. It's not magic. It's not mysticism. It's not this, who knows, and I'm not going to try to learn. And it's just, it doesn't make sense. It's just magic. Same thing with our physiologies, at 613 Lift, at the gym, with any physiological thing, we understand that, well, if my elbow is hurting, there are factors that caused my elbow to hurt. Maybe I've been overtraining. Maybe I've been undereating. Maybe my fatigue is out of control and I've not been recovering effectively. We know that there are all of these subsystems that lead to outputs. That's to say there are inputs that lead to outputs. And I think that one of the only areas in our culture that we kind of go, oh, who knows? And, this is just beyond us, is our psychology. And I think that this phenomenon occurs for many reasons, but people just throw up their hands. Yep, I'm anxious. Or a lot of guys don't understand how to quantify anxiety or even put a finger on anxiety. I've had lots of clients who say, I'm not an anxious person. And then they'll right after use words like, I've been worrying, I've been thinking, I keep ruminating on. I just keep, worrying. I've got all these questions. And I say, that's anxiety, man. What do you think it was? So I guess to cut it a little short here, you can understand how this stuff works. And it is only through understanding it that you can do anything about it, that you can fix it, that you can change it. We try to do this with all other systems in our life. And when it comes to our mental health, how we feel, how we behave, we just kind of go, that is how it is. Yep, that's what my parents did. So that's how I have to do it, I guess. That's just genetic predisposition. As if societal and experiential factors, or I should just say experiential factors there, can change those things completely. If you aren't getting the output that you are expecting, that means you don't understand it. Yeah, so let's finish off on those strong words.
Okay. I understand what it is to be in a field of work where a lot of the time you see your peers doing a disservice to the clients, right? I'm not saying a lot of them are doing it intentfully. I think some are and refuse to change or grow. But yeah, there's a lot of people in fields. And when you're in a field where people are coming to you to better their life, to improve their circumstance and their situation, you sure as hell better have your ducks in a row and understand that these people are vulnerable, that if they're coming to you or I, they probably generally want to better their life, their circumstances, their situation. So you better have a very clear plan of action when it comes to wanting to help somebody. So, you covered some really important things when it came to men and how we handle things and what needs to take place. What are some common misconceptions that you would say men have about seeking help for mental health issues and things like depression, anxiety?
So there's the classics everyone's aware of, that I'm weak, that I'm less than, that I can figure this out myself. It's a very morbid, dark joke, which, kind of aligns with the way I do things. But the theme is that men will often only go to therapy for two reasons. One is for addictions issues, and one is for relationship issues. I do see clients for anxiety, depression, beliefs, self esteem, all kinds of other issues. But my work, and I'm a specialist in compulsive behavior and addictions. The overwhelming amount of work I do is on addictions and compulsive behavior. The reasons why men go to therapy for those two reasons, again, relationship issues and compulsive behavior issues, is because that's when things really go to shit and their hand is forced. Necessity is the mother of invention. With addiction, we can really see our lives spiral down and us do some pretty crazy stuff and not understand why. And that leads to all kinds of other issues. And of course, relationship issues, we see us hurting other people. Or either we kind of decide, okay, enough's enough, or the other person gives us an ultimatum and goes, enough's enough, figure this stuff out. So I don't want to make it seem too polarized, but because I do all kinds of eclectic work, and I specialize in helping clients understand their psychology comprehensively. And that entails understanding addiction, compulsive behavior, avoidant behavior, anxiety, depression, reactivity, dissociative behavior, etc., and on and on and on. But a bulk of my work focuses on compulsive behavior. Other misconceptions that a therapist can't help me. And, we've kind of just talked about how a lot of therapists can't seem to, or won't, or don't. In my field, actually, to cover some misconceptions or conceptions, truly, there are a lot of different ways of doing therapy. This isn't a standardized thing. There are all kinds of different forms of therapy that a psychologist, a registered psychotherapist, a counselor, whatever their distinction, can practice. And you're supposed to somehow understand this as a layperson when you're seeking out, a therapist. You can go on Psychology Today, or any other advertising platform and look for a therapist yourself, and they'll use all kinds of different jargon that even myself, I don't understand. There are all these new forms of therapy with all these fancy words and acronyms. And when I, Google what they are, or I look back in my textbooks if it's something older, I realize, oh, this is just something painted in a new light, or it's just something that I don't find very self-efficacious, excuse me. So there are all kinds of different ways of doing therapy. There are all kinds of different practitioners who have their own approach. And the advice I'd give, and maybe this is another question you'd have, so I'm answering it now. The advice I'd give is vet your therapists. Grill these people. These are working as contractors for you. You are giving them a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of your effort. So grill them. I've just had a conversation with a friend the other day. They're seeking out a therapist as well, and this was the advice I give them. I give advice like this all the time. You might be surprised how many people in the background go about asking, how do I find a therapist? How do I even get started? They have the tact to not ask me to be their therapist because they understand I can't be because of the dual relationship. And I try to help them as best I can with seeking out the resource that they can utilize. So I feel like I'm all over the place a little bit here. Don't be afraid to wrangle me with your questions.
No, that's again touching on a very important point that I completely agree with. And I tell my clients this all the time. I love that you and I have a very similar mindset when it comes to the approaches. People work hard for their money, and they want to make sure that their money is being well spent. And nothing pisses me off more when I see the lack of professionalism. So I always tell my clients, I might tell you what to do, just like you instruct your clients on this process they're going through, but we work for you. Just because I know more about what you're going through doesn't mean I'm the boss. You're the boss. You're helping me by being a client, and because of you, I get to make a career out of this. I get to pay my bills, and I get to hopefully have more clients because, one of the best ways to get more clients is that word of mouth, right? Referrals. So you want to make sure you're doing a good job. So I love the fact that you're more focused, I think, on your name than
Mm.
your username.
Yeah. Plus, I we talked about this the other day. I'm not beholden to a lot of restrictions. I don't have a lot of ulterior motives. Like, I'm not coming on this podcast to seek out new clients. I'm at capacity right now. I can't take on new clients. And I imagine many of the clients I might get from here, I'd have dual relationships with because we go to the same gym. I I'm at capacity. I've got my money in order. I've got my life in order here. And I do my work because I love it. What can be more rewarding than helping other people with something that they can't help themselves with? And, I want to make it clear. I used to be a cynical bastard. And, I think it comes across in the way that I speak. The idea of working, forever and it being something cool or rewarding or even the words coming out my mouth, I know what that's like. Even when I was working in mental health, historically, when I was working at the Salvation Army downtown with all the homeless men there, when I was working at the halfway house, when I was working with the distress center or, any of these other organizations, work was something to do to eat and to get the things that I wanted. Retirement was an exciting opportunity. Now I don't think about retirement because I don't want to retire. I hope I get to do this till the wheels fall off, till I'm 90 years old. So very little ulterior motives. Truly the one thing that might be limiting me here in terms of what I can say to your listeners is how ignorant I might be. I always try to learn more and more, and I try to disseminate this to, the people that will listen. In fact, I tell my clients all the time, I'm teaching you how to be your own therapist, how to do the work that you need to do. Pass on this information to family and friends, spread the good word, truly. I would love to be out of a job. In the back of my head, I understand that that's never really going to be an option, but I'd love to be out of a job. I can find something else to do, I've got my ducks in a row. So I don't even remember what your question was. I'm kind of just rambling here. Please.
How do you help your clients understand, let's say, depression,
Mm.
anxiety? Because I think fundamentally, in order for someone to get, I know you don't like the word healed. So
Mm.
in order for someone to address
Mm.
depression, because I think a lot of the time, and I'm sure you've heard this, right? It's the labeling is enabling, right? Someone goes to a specialist and you have depression.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'm depressed.
Yep.
Right. And then we start to condition ourselves and we adopt the identity, even though I don't think it was ever really we might have felt like, well, I've got my good days, I got my bad days. But because some professional labels you with,
Yes.
you have depression, we start to condition ourselves to be depressed. Our posture changes, our self-care changes or stops, our self-talk changes, right? All these things start to change. And it doesn't happen over time. We start the erosion occurs over time. It's not instant. It's not like you have depression. Well, tomorrow I wake up depressed. No, it slowly builds. We slowly condition ourselves. It slowly gets worse. So how can you help our audience understand depression, anxiety? What does that mean from the I think you said the evolutionary
Mhm.
standpoint, so that we can grasp this?
That's exactly where I'm going. But first, on the point on labeling is enabling, I think putting a finger on these things, saying that you have depression or you are depressed, it's a quirk of language more than anything. And it's a quirk of this medicalization of like very natural processes, very normal, natural, and health processes that are occurring. So note the language. If you try to find parallels to physiological domains, saying that, oh, you have a busted up elbow, someone's not going to say, oh my God, my elbow's screwed forever. They see it as a symptom, as a perhaps temporary thing. Now imagine you start to use language as, oh, you have, elbow use disorder or whatever, which, alcohol use disorder, there's parallels there to make. And then a person goes, oh my God, my elbow might be screwed up permanently. And there's all kinds of issues going on there. So there's been a lot of medicalization here. And anxiety can be, for one little digression here, anxiety can be one of the most normal things out there, one of the most natural things out there, when it is rational. For us to worry about some big stressor that we have coming up, say you're supposed to do a presentation in front of 1,000 people. And if you mess up that presentation, it could cost you your job. It could cost you the esteem of your peers. It can cost you a lot of money. Well, you're going to be anxious about that. And let's bridge the gap between what does anxiety really mean and how are we going to define it? Well, I can go right to the DSM-5 for this to showcase the diagnostic criteria. Although I'm not a big supporter of that necessarily, but it's you're overthinking, you're worrying a lot, you're asking question after question after question after question. There are physiological symptoms of anxiety, of course, and there's physiological discomfort that comes around with that. But if someone were to tell you, Don't be worried. Don't be anxious about that. You'd say, what are you talking about? This could cost me like everything. This could cost me my job. This could cost me like how I support my family. You're telling me I shouldn't worry about it? And the person would go, oh, well, like maybe don't worry that much about it. And it's like, why not? It's hard to come up with a justification why not. But then we have to form a distinction here where there are irrational anxieties, where we worry about things that aren't necessarily as stressful as we think. Being worried about, this goes to a lot of classic fears and phobias, but it can also be, a lot of veterans, loud popping sounds and banging sounds. Well, what's the reaction you have when you hear fireworks? When an engine, backfires, although, engines don't really backfire too much anymore. There's that reaction that occurs. And, if we're to get really into how your psychology works, which is like very classic first or second session that I do with the client, we can understand why that is. So on the evolutionary side, because that was all a digression, you have these behavioral systems, like your cognition, your behavior is the way that it is, your feelings, your emotions, all that stuff is the way that it is because of evolutionary pressures. I don't know anybody else who talks about evolutionary psychology, and I don't know why, because that's where the answers come from. Why we're so social, why rejection might hurt so much, why we need, don't forget, sleep, diet, and exercise is under the purview of behavior as well. Why do we need those things? In fact, let me bridge another gap to the physiological here. Exercise is so important for us. And a lot of people don't acknowledge this. And a lot of people have trouble answering why. Well, one perspective here, I'm not saying this is the be all end all, but one perspective here is that you need it or else you'll get sick. Your evolution, like the evolutionary pressures, the context that you were in historically, for the last tens and tens of thousands of years, dictate that if you are not moving, things will go to shit. And no pun intended here, but the peristalsis of your gut, digestion, is largely regulated by movement, by walking. It is the squeezing of your abdominal muscles, the movement of your hips that help to regulate, not to mention helps regulate hormonal systems, regulate blood pressure, regulate all kinds of, it's not coming to me, circulatory system issues. Your lower back has such little vasculature. And why is that? Well, it didn't need a lot because our hips were constantly moving. Your lower back was constantly rotating, and that would help to regulate the cerebral spinal fluid, I suppose, regulate the blood flow throughout that region. Now, what are we doing? We're sitting down all the time. We're not moving. Some people are getting, 500 steps a day, 1,000 steps a day, when we would be moving like crazy. This 10,000 steps a day piece comes from, that's the minimum here. That's like what you need to be healthy. That's a good metric, but like, damn, that's what you should be trying to hit every single day. So evolutionary psychology to me, and this is how I frame it with clients, that's where the answers come from. That's why you are the way that you are. The arbitrary restrictions that you have come from that. So I frame, if you want to understand how you are, you have to use evolutionary psychology largely. And if you want to understand what you can do about it, you have to practice the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is like the nitty gritty. Okay, what do we do about this? How do we fix these issues? Because a lot of these mental health problems that we have, depression, anxiety, compulsive behavior, they are issues that can be fixed. And a lot of people shirk away, especially in my field, they shirk away from that language because they think it's pathologizing. They think that it's stigmatizing. And it's not. Call a spade a spade. A person with a hurt elbow, it's not stigmatizing to say, oh, your elbow's kind of fucked up. Your elbow's, excuse my language, your elbow is messed up, right? So anyways, again, rambling. But evolutionary psychology is where these answers come from. And if I'm going to keep running with it, let's look at depression. Right? And I always like to form physiological metaphors and physiological parallels here. One of the examples we'll see with the depression is, and this is what people in more physiological fields will call a depression, physiological depression, medical depression. It's when your body shuts down. If you look at the DSM-5, you'll see diagnostic criteria of feeling tired, feeling fatigued. You'll see perspective changes, such as no longer enjoying the things you used to enjoy and having no motivation. Why would your brain be doing that? That's the question we want to be asking. Why would my brain be creating these symptoms? Because these symptoms don't come from nowhere. Why would my brain be creating these symptoms? And to that, I would say, well, what do those symptoms make you do? They make you sit down, do nothing, not want to do anything, and not use a lot of the resources that you might have. And when do we see this? When we have the flu. when we are overwhelmed with work. And they serve the same kind of utility. With a flu, your brain is trying to make you sit down, do nothing, not want to do anything, so that it can use all of its physiological resources to manage a infection. Your brain knows that, oh shit, if this infection goes rampant, like, we might have a lot more work to do. There can be organ failure, there can be more damage along with it. And with more social symptoms, like a psychological depression, we are overwhelmed. We are overexerting ourselves. Maybe we aren't sleeping well. Maybe, and you'll see this as well, this is where the blend between psychological and physiological occurs with, sorry, if you're not sleeping well, if you're not eating well, if you're extremely overwhelmed, you're using a lot of the resources that you have. If you're not engaging in social well-being, if your social health is horrible, you're going to experience a depression as well for the same reasons. One way that I can sum up a lot of the evolutionary psychology stuff is your brain is trying to keep you alive. You just don't understand how. And when you can understand why your brain is turning on these behaviors, your subconscious is turning on these behaviors, such as depression, anxiety, compulsive behavior, reactivity, etc., all the ones I've been saying. Only then can you stop it. Only then can you work with it. And that's where I start my first and second session with clients. It's all about understanding that.
Okay, so just before I forget,
Yep.
DSM-5, you mentioned it twice. What does it stand for? Just for the audience, just so they know, because I
Diagnostics
have no idea what that is.
Yeah, it stands for the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual 5. So it is the agreed upon manual in which there are diagnostic criteria for mental health issues and behaviors. I'm not saying that that's the be all end all definition, but when a, say, psychiatrist or a psychologist needs to make a diagnosis, they're going to be using that to inform their diagnostic criteria. A lot of diagnostic tools are going to be informed by the DSM-5. Yeah, it's kind of like rules
I
and
had a feeling
regulation.
it had something to do with a manual or something you guys use. I wanted clarification, just in case it gets brought up a third time, maybe later on in the episode.
Try to bring it up as least as I can. Yeah, truly. Anyways.
Fair enough. So I really liked how you were talking about working against what our brain sometimes wants to start, because I mean, this is something that I experienced myself personally for a really long time. Actually, the majority of my 20s, I ran from facing what happened to me when I was young. I ran from my problems, kind of refused to take responsibility for my actions. And because of that, I had to suffer some pretty severe consequences. As you and as a lot of my listeners know, I paid pretty heavily for that. So when it comes to that, I mean, for myself, I used to say my first line of coping was always weed. I smoked a lot of weed in my 20s, and it just allowed me to escape the life that I'd created for myself, the life that I hated. And that was I guess my form of coping. So when we're trying to address the issues you just kind of talked about, what are some things that my listeners could potentially take and start maybe doing themselves when it comes to trying to understand why their brain is doing what it's doing and what they need to be actively aware of in order to kind of combat that coping or that escape or whatever it is that we tend to do?
So complex behavior, right? This is compulsive behavior, or at least if we're talking about substance use or just engaging in a behavior that we know is bad for us. And we go, why the hell am I doing this? But we keep doing it anyway. Things that you can do, I can list off tons of different tools, but they'll mean nothing to you. They'll just be this appeal to authority. They'll just be like, oh, Casper's a therapist. He's telling me to do this. I guess I should do it. And that's just not how guys work. That's not how a lot of people work. I'm not going to do something just because somebody tells me. And this is the issue I had with some physiotherapists historically. Unless you're telling me why I need to do these movements, why I need to do these exercises, why I need to not do certain things, I'm not going to do it. Plus, what if I do them by accident without even knowing the behaviors that I'm not supposed to do? Let's say I need to understand what I'm doing so that I can optimize it as much as possible. A line that I really like that I say to clients in consultations is, I might see you for 1 hour each week, but all the change that you're going to see comes from those other 167 hours in that week. Check my math on that, but that's a line I've been saying for a while. You have to know what's going on. And you have to be doing the work. You're not going to, first off, in terms of motivational processes, is kind of a zoomed out and like kind of meta look at this thing. You're not going to be motivated to do the work unless you understand why it's doing what it's doing. So, you're asking for tools. I haven't got tools for you. Not at this point. In fact, perhaps it'd be better to start with discussing how your psychology works and why those tools might start. This is where I go into the dichotomy that occurs with your psychology. It's up to you in which direction you'd like to take this, but there's going to be a little piece of a lecture here. If we're wanting to understand what tools we can use, shortcuts. In fact, actually, let me even say something else to that. For anyone who's trying to manage their behavioral issues, more cognitive issues, they might have done a lot of things short of hiring a professional. I'm not saying that everyone needs a professional. And I definitely don't want to be that guy saying that. But you've looked at multiple podcasts, perhaps, or read many papers. You've heard all these people on Instagram and TikTok telling you what are some great tools. And you've heard, all these different tools in the zeitgeist, journaling or meditation, or, if we're getting specific into compulsive behavior, the importance of staying busy and replacement, replacing one vice with something that might be good. But unless you understand why these tools will work, you're not going to adhere to them. That's why, I'm not trying to be a meanie here for using some better terms, but this is why you continue to have the problem that you have over and over and over again. And I know I sound like a broken record, but I want to burn into people's heads. Usually I have clients paying me to tell them this information, so I kind of have a captive audience here, I suppose. Maybe they're hearing stuff they don't necessarily want to hear, but you're having the same problem over and over again because you don't understand it. And if you understood it, you'd be able to change it. So there's no way of speeding through this. I could say the exact same things you've heard a million times, that you need to journal, that you need to meditate, that you need to do blah, 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 blah. And it's going to mean nothing to you, and it's going to fall right. It's going to, hit your head, and then it's going to fall right off instead of sticking.
Yeah, you nailed it. Because so many times when you're working with a specialist, they will tell you, I need you to do X, Y, Z, right? In order to rehab or rehabilitate, right? Whether you're rehabbing a joint or a muscle, or you're rehabilitating your mental, emotional, like the whole kind of human, I don't know if psyche is the right word. I'm not a specialist in this, but just trying to rehabilitate maybe fundamentally who you are inside. And that was a big thing for me, because when I was incarcerated, the real work was not done in front of my parole officer. It wasn't done with my correctional officer. It wasn't done with my therapist. It wasn't done in front of other inmates. It was done in the quiet place, which was my cell, where I was alone with my thoughts. And that's where I and this is something that, I think is great that people are talking about journaling. We talked about this actually this past week. And the big problem though, is that people, number one, they don't know where to start, because you have all these gurus and coaches and experts saying you need to journal. Okay, about what?
Yep.
Where do I start? What's the purpose of journaling? What am I looking at here? Because you're right. As men, we want to understand. I don't want to just write things on paper. I need to understand what's the purpose of me picking up a pen and a piece of paper and writing down my feelings, because you touched on this just a couple minutes ago. I'm with you for 1 hour, but it's critical that 1 hour has homework and follow through for the other, what I think you said 167. Don't check our math, please, but maybe the other 167 hours. What are you doing so that when you see me, if I'm your patient and you see me the following week, there has to be momentum being built in the direction that I want to head. So let's tackle the journaling thing, because that is something I think is instrumental. It was instrumental in my healing. I know how I used it, but how do you go about implementing this in your clients?
So I'm a zealot for journaling, and all of my clients know it. I am on their case, there's a nice way of putting it, about journaling. In fact, I'm infamous for a line with my clients that if they are not journaling, they are screwing up. They are not going to see the change that they want to see. They are not doing any actual work there, or they're doing like a small fraction of what they could be doing. They are just not processing and working through what they need to do. So I want to preface this to say that there are multiple ways to journal, and that is not that important of a piece at this point. One way that I can explain journaling is just writing things down. But let me explain why it's actually effective first. So This is a whole little model that I have with clients. In fact, a lot of my work is just expressing the same 20, 30 models to different clients, why things are the way that they are and why you need to do what you need to do. If you understand that there's no other option but doing what I'm laying out in front of you, then you're going to do it eventually. You might stew in your misery for a little bit, but you'll eventually do it. So with journaling, this is a model on the ways that we process information. And think about how important of a term that is, processing of information. And we are constantly taking in information. We're taking in sensory information, what people said. Sometimes what people say bothers us. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just echoes through our head. We're listening to music and podcasts. We're doing the work that we're doing. We have like relationship stuff and memories coming up. And all this needs to be processed. There are three different ways that we process information, and they all have different benefits and detriments to them. And one of the first ways that we'll process information, and actually let me form a little spectrum here. I think I'm within the box. There's one way of processing, there's a second way of processing, and there's a third way of processing. The first way that we process information is just in our head, thinking about things, the classic. And this has great utility in that we can think about things virtually whenever, but it has absolutely horrendous depth. We cannot process big things in our minds. Why would somebody do that? There's a million different reasons for why. Trying to get into the head of another person and what their motivations might be, we just can't do that stuff. What do I want from life? You'll find that you ask the same questions over and over and over. You're chewing on it throughout the day. And one of the reasons why is because this medium, simply thinking about it in your own head, is a horrific way to do it. That's why we'll go over it time and time and time again. We might go from A to B to C to D, then all the way back to A to B to C to D.
It's almost like a closed loop when you're in your head,
We
right?
just don't
You're
have.
kind of going round in circles
Yep.
with the same thing over and over again because you're overthinking. You're
We just
overthinking
don't
what
have.
you're doing.
We just don't have the mental bandwidth to do it. And I haven't gotten into the evolutionary psychology stuff, which I'd love to, and perhaps in the next. I keep saying, you have to understand it, and I feel like I'm going to have to swear here, but I'll feel like the biggest asshole if I never get to talk about how to understand it. If I just say, "Oh, you don't understand it, you don't understand it," well, those are my secrets, No, I'd love to explain it.
Help us understand, please.
Exactly,
Absolutely.
exactly, and that'll come after here. But with journaling, with thinking about things, understand what you are evolved for. You are wandering around a little forest, and you had the same stuff in front of you every day. You had the same relationship dynamics, the same individuals around you. There were no big thoughts, big concerns. You weren't overstimulated by your phone and social media and a million people and what are they thinking, what are they doing? You had the same, 50, 150 maximum, that's whole Dunbar's number thing, people surrounding you at all times. So you were in an environment where you were free to think and free associate. That's to say you didn't have a lot of things on your mind. You weren't blasting yourself with music. You weren't blasting yourself with social media. You weren't blasting yourself with working. We had time to think. We had time to process. So it was more effective back then. And that's to say that we didn't need this immense supercomputer to process the very simplistic things that we have. We've essentially put on, supercomputer requiring factors into a very limited computer, which is our psychology. So we just don't have the mental bandwidth. It's like we have a workspace, a foot by a foot, but we've got big, complex pieces that need to be put together. We just can't do it in a very good way. In fact, this is why you'll see, and I'm sure a lot of listeners here have issues falling asleep. They find that when they go to bed, they just can't stop thinking, can't stop thinking, can't stop thinking. And, one of the simple reasons for that is you didn't give yourself time to think all day. You didn't give yourself time to process through that all day. And now your brain is finally taking it because it's a must do. But that's a whole digression here.
So it's almost like the curse, right, of not sitting with things is
Yes.
You're just distracting yourself because we get uncomfortable. So when we get uncomfortable, what's our default? Well, right now, I think most of us grab our phone and we scroll. I don't want to deal with this right now, right? It's like, I'm just going to escape. It doesn't have to be drugs. It can just be escape through social media. And then what's worse is because we're in an anxious or sad state, now we're going on to a form of, let's say, distraction, a form of coping that we've developed now as a society that now puts us through a whole host of emotions in seconds, right? From a happy post to a sad post and it's up and down. And then, we at the end of the day, we're sitting there Why am I so sad? Why am I
Mm.
so anxious? And it's
Yeah.
like, because you haven't thought of anything, and now you're sitting here facing the day's problems in the quiet, because that's when you do it.
It's more is we're not designed for any of this. There's a line which I love, one of my favorites, and I've got a lot of lines that I like here, which is if you ever want to find pathology, where the problems are occurring, problems themselves, look at the intersection between our innate psychology or physiology and technology, because we are just not designed for these things. And you can say this for processed food. Our guts, our digestive systems are just not designed for the ways that we eat and the things that we eat. And we see problems from it. We're not designed. And when I say design, I'm using evolutionary pressures. Anyone wanting to put on spiritual values there, I'm completely okay with whatever. But for the evolutionary stuff, that's where a lot of these answers come from. We're not designed. We haven't evolved towards, I should say, instead of designed, constant stimulation. Other technologies, like, and I have to pick these ones carefully because a lot of these are hot button issues. Let's say sitting down, a chair, you know, our ability to just sit down. I heard this in the first episode. Everyone's backs are like completely blown
My
out.
lower back is tight, it's sore.
Exactly. And yeah, because you're sitting down. You used to be moving around. We were hunter-gatherers for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. We were constantly moving around, constantly bending over, constantly twisting. Now we're sitting, our lower back extended, us without tension, having our hips cocked to like a 90-degree angle. And it's horrific for us. Plus, we're not moving. So, the technology of just, all the technologies that lead to us just having comfortable lives, it leads to such problematic physiological issues and psychological issues. We're not supposed to be around, or are supposed to be around. That sounds like a value judgment. We have not evolved to be around all of these people. We have not evolved to be around, I'll keep it short here, so many of the things that we're around right now. So again, this is where I plug that evolutionary psychology stuff. Unless you understand what you are evolved for, what your evolution has designed you towards, you're not going to understand why you're having the problems that you're having. And again, I'm not trying to be the guy who keeps saying, you don't understand, you don't understand, you don't understand. But you don't. If you did, then the problem wouldn't be there. Then you'd be able to manage the problem accordingly. That's how we deal with all kinds of other systems. But we were talking about journaling. So perhaps I'll go back to that. Thinking about things, extremely, extremely limited. Great for small things, horrible for big things. And we've got a lot of big things going on. So one of the other ways that we process information is by talking with other people. And I'm using my hands here. I imagine some of viewers aren't watching the video here necessarily. I have 1, 2, and 3 kind of on a spectrum, all equidistant from one another. On the other end of the spectrum, we have talking with other people. We all have memories of having a conversation with someone that just changed our lives, that made us think about things differently. And interestingly here, the important aspect of this is not the other person talking back. It's us talking to them. It's us taking all of those thoughts, ether, ideas that I was mentioning before, thinking those thoughts and transforming them into spoken word. There are multiple instances of transformation that occur there. And that's why sometimes we'll talk and we will start to talk like this, because as we're turning them into words, we look at them differently. We're ascribing labels to abstract ideas, so we process it differently. And we might come to conclusions while we're talking. We might say, hold on, let me write that down. That was a good, oh my God, I didn't realize that. That's us coming with new conclusions, coming up with new connections as we talk things through with other people. What's more is, since we're social creatures, and this is some more of that evolutionary psychology stuff. We're social creatures. We try to empathize and understand how the other person might see what we're talking about. So as we're talking to somebody, we might say, "Oh no, not like that. Sorry, like this," and we'll self-correct. We'll say things in a different light. We will see things from different perspectives. So that's another instance of processing. This is why, and I want to put I want to put a caveat around this. This is why a lot of people think that talk therapy is just talking about things. This is both on the client side and the therapist side. A lot of therapists think that just talking things out can be therapeutic. And yes, it can help people process, but it doesn't necessarily help people solve their problems, because some problems need novel information. I should have noted earlier on, this is usually a classic line of mine. The first 2 sessions that I have with clients are lectures. It is me talking at a client for an hour at a time, because I need to explain how these systems work, how your psychology works, how it relates to stress, how it forms associations, your subconscious is not necessarily a thinking or caring agent. It doesn't understand. It just forms associations. And again, perhaps that's a chapter we'll do in a future session here.
But that's what I'm planning on
Yep.
the
I like
next
that. I like
podcast
that a
with
lot.
you is the lecture. 'Cause
Yeah.
I would love for you to, again, just educate the audience, because it's nice to have someone who understands this to the depth
Hmm.
that you do from the theoretical standpoint. It's important. So now what's the third one? So you've
Yes.
covered
So we're
your
getting there.
mind, you've covered the
Well,
social dynamic,
we've covered thinking about things, and we've
right?
covered
Thinking about
talking
things,
with other people. And again, talking with other people, I want to make clear, great depth. Oh my God, it's so good. Horrible utility. That's to say, we don't have a lot of people that we can talk to. And there are people that
yes.
we might have topics that we don't want to talk through with anybody. So, what's the third option? And this is where I come into journaling, of course. Journaling is not really right in the middle, equidistant to, thinking about things and journaling or talking with other people. It's all the way over here, right beside talking with other people, because it is so similar to talking with other people. We are transforming those ether, wisps, thoughts, ideas into written word rather than spoken word. And we are able to look at what we've written down, reflect on it after. We're able to just focus on that one thought instead of, when we're just thinking about things in our head, we'll get distracted. We'll, try to do your budgeting for a month, you know, and you'll find you get about 5 items deep before forgetting, okay, there's my rent and it's this much, and this is my grocery bill, and that covers, my supplements and everything. I have my heating, my electricity, my phone bill. Shit, did I put my supplements into my diet? And did I cover all of the, other costs that I have with my food? And then you get lost. Have some humility. We have such limited processing power when we're just using the mental bandwidth that we have. So with journaling, we have the mental bandwidth of a full piece of paper. You will find that when you journal, as you get more and more comfortable with it, it can be just as good as a good conversation with a friend in terms of how you process through things. You will come to new conclusions. You will find new pieces of information. You'll find new inferences as you sit on. When my wife mentioned a male coworker, I got really uncomfortable. Why is that? Doing that in your head, it's a mess. You bounce from one thing to another and you might just get uncomfortable, so you stop thinking about it. When you have to stare at that line on a piece of paper, why did I get uncomfortable when my wife mentioned a male coworker? You have to churn on it over and over and over. There's no escaping it. You'll come to a bunch of different answers, and then you can follow those answers deeper and deeper and deeper. My line here, now that I've explained most of it, is there's no other option. Thinking about things is a horrible modality. This is why you ask the same questions over and over in your head. And the one opportunity you might have to talk with somebody else, that's when it might come to some understanding. The same can be done through journaling. I think everybody should have a journaling practice. And how do you do it? Just write things down. Just ask a bunch of questions. Why was I happy? Why was I angry? Why was I sad? Why did that have that reaction? Why am I feeling badly today? We just can't answer these complex questions in our own head. But the question of, why do I feel like shit today? When we write it down, we might be able to stare at that and go, okay, well, how was my sleep? How was my diet? How's my exercise? How was I feeling when I first woke up versus how was I feeling after breakfast? Maybe there's some variables I can tease out. You can start to quantify. You can start to parse things out. You can do good work in your journaling. You can do good work in conversations with other people. It's not lost on perhaps many of the viewers here. The gym can act as, kind of a space to process. Everyone's just gabbing and talking and figuring great things out. We've had tons of conversations where we go, that's a great idea. That's a good thing. That's so interesting. Plus, there's all the social benefit that comes along with it, not just the processing. So again, the line is, there's no other option. Thinking about things is horrific in terms of processing. And, talking with other people is great. And I can assure you, journaling is just like that. So again, how do you do it? Just start writing. Just start asking questions. Just start observing. How do I feel? What do I think? What did I do? That's my hard sell on journaling. Practice it for a few minutes each day. That habit book, Atomic Habits book everyone's so excited about, as they should be. Read that. Do it for a few minutes each day. Make it a part of your bedtime routine. Make it a part of your morning routine. Just get it in like anything else. 2 minutes a day, fine. 5 minutes a day, fine. just start doing it little by little. It's like one of those things that seems so crazy because you don't know anybody else who's doing it. And then the more you talk about it, you realize everybody's doing it. It's like one of those things like stretching in the morning, where when you start doing it, you go, oh my God, I can't believe I wasn't doing this. I strongly recommend it. So that's my hard sell, I suppose.
I love it because you encompass the importance of it. I think you actually really stress the importance of it. And for
Yeah.
me, I think it was
Necessity.
probably one of the biggest game changers when I was going through my journey, my road to redemption, as I have kind of coined it, when I was in prison. Because no, there wasn't many people I could talk to. I didn't want to go talk to other inmates because the other inmates in there were not in a good place themselves. Most of them weren't actively working towards bettering themselves. I was one of the very few people who was actively on a daily basis. Once I got my shit together, once I actually started to acknowledge that I was in there because of what I did and stop blaming everyone else, I had to sit in that. And in order to sit in that, you have to start processing it. And trying to process it up here, it's kind of like I believe you and I were the ones who were talking about this. It's like trying to solve a complex math equation.
Yep.
And I suck at math. So it's like if someone gave me a complex math equation and said, Tyson, solve this in your head, there's no chance. Hell, most multiplication and division, I would need to do that on paper,
Hmm.
let alone a complex one. And
Look
what
at
we're
that.
dealing with, our
That's
past,
journaling
our
too.
struggles.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
Well,
That's journaling too. Getting a piece of paper, writing it down, putting it on paper. Sorry to interrupt, man.
no, but that's exactly where I'm heading, right? It's a looking at that equation is like looking at our life. Where do you even start? So journaling allowed me to process not only what I was trying to deal with from why I was in prison, but even what I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis with my social interactions. Why certain things that people did triggered such a reaction out of me. Why would I get so mad so easily? What was that? What was the reason for that? Now, again, imagine you just trying to think and solve that in your head. But then you start to think about, well, wait a minute. The way that guy talked to me reminded me about, let's say, how my grandfather used to act. And that's why it triggered such a strong emotional response in me. You talked earlier about veterans, PTSD. I think of Jay, my co-host, who's usually on the podcast with me. He's used to the, kind of the banging on the powerlifting side, but there's certain days where he has a really tough time with that. And it's like, yeah, dude, you were in war zones. I'm pretty sure I'd have a tough time with that if that's what I went through. Because I remember certain triggers when people whistle. Guards are notorious for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And what it kind of means in prison. There was the jingling of the keys. So when I hear people jingle their keys, there's an automatic reaction. Even heels, women walking in high heels, because parole officers, the female parole officers in prison, love to wear high heels because they echo. And it get like when you hear a fast walk behind you as an inmate, you automatically turn to look to go see what's going on. And then they look at you, all pissed off, like, how dare you look at me? I say, well, I'm hearing a fast footstep coming up behind me, and I'm going to look. That's self-preservation right there.
Yep.
And it's processing all that stuff. And again, when you're processing it in your mind, like that complex math equation, you're not going to be able to solve it. But journaling provides it. So be messy. I think that's what the people need to understand is it doesn't need to be. It won't even make sense at first. It didn't make sense for me at first when I started. I was just told to by my therapist and the Aboriginal elder when I was doing a program when I was in maximum security, journal, Tyson. Okay, screw it, whatever. And that was kind of the thing the therapist told me. He's like, just write your messy thoughts down. He's like, I promise you it'll start to make sense.
Mm-hmm.
So just be messy. It won't make sense in the beginning.
In the subtext here as well, to sell it even harder, because this is like the major game changer. This is one of the tools that can really help us is look at the skills you're training by doing this. You're training skills of self-awareness, of introspection, of what am I going through right now? Or what was I going through before? What happened there? You're training yourself to learn more and more and more. I know Jordan Peterson, he's become quite a controversial figure for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things he was, at least, or probably still is, I imagine, really big on was essay writing. And I think he had the whole line of, if you train yourself how to write, you'll train yourself how to think. What is an essay? You are bringing up a point. You're bringing up typically, 3 supporting points, 3 supporting paragraphs. Why that thesis that I originally noted makes sense. This point, this point, this point, and there's a conclusion wrapping it all together. So if you can train yourself to write in that manner, or in whatever manner, in a structured manner. That's what I'm talking about. In a structured way, wise and answering the questions that are kind of lingering there. You're training yourself how to think. It doesn't have to be a mess. Plus, you can train all kinds of other skills here. A great example here is I had a client who had very little awareness over his emotional state, over what he was going through. And he would note, feeling frustrated and then asking himself why and realizing that he's been frustrated for 2 hours and that it was some interaction he had with a receptionist or secretary or whatever a few hours ago. And that feeling had just continued on instead of being dealt with. So we have a problem here. He's not even aware of the feelings he's having. How is he going to do anything about them? This is a huge line. If you're not even aware of something, how are you going to do anything about it? We need to practice awareness. How do you do that? Do it manually. You want something to become automatic? Do it manually. We see this in physical training as well. You want to have a really good bench press where, your elbows just track the bar so well and they fall exactly where they need to be? Well, you need to do it manually over time. And then your subconscious is going to make the associations over and over and over, build up that relationship. And the next thing you know, usually it takes quite a bit of time. You just have the perfect bench press. As you practice going, what emotions am I experiencing? What emotions did I experience throughout the day and why? You can do that ad hoc or in vivo as it occurs better. What I also had him do, just to showcase this training of awareness, is set a silent alarm every hour. Your phone lights up and it's a reminder of, what am I feeling right now?
Mm.
Getting the reps in. There's this is Psych 101 stuff, but the more you do something, the more you will do something. This is how you build a habit. This is how you build proficiency in any skill. The less you do something, the less you will do it. This is how you have extinction of behaviors, to use a very clinical psychology term. It'll just die out. So say you have a bad behavior, that's one way of doing it, to get rid of it. And say you want to instill a good behavior, that's another way you go about it.
Well, we need to schedule self-care like we schedule meetings.
Yeah.
It's very simple, but people fail to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, I'm going to do this today, but they don't schedule it. They don't make a specific time to do it. So then it doesn't get done because the day gets away from you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I've actually been doing for the past week. So I've noticed that with just what I'm trying to do currently in this stage of my life, my goal is to step away from personal training in the foreseeable future and focus more on coaching and mentoring. I love personal training, but I also realize I don't want to be a 50, 55-year-old, personal trainer because I know I'll lose my spark and my love for it by that time, because I don't want to have to be, kind of being the weight gopher. Go for this weight, go for that weight. Not that it's beneath me. I'd like to do something where when I'm 70, because I love to work, when I'm 70 years of age, 80 years of age, I can still mentor people. And I'm going to have even more life experience then than I do now. So it's something that I know that if I start putting more effort into it, I can continue to do this and continue to feel fulfilled and working towards something that I know I'm capable of doing for the long term. Like you said, you want to do this till the wheels fall off.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's something about serving other people, helping other people, that is just so damn rewarding.
It's not nothing, it's not nothing at all. And, when we talk about that evolutionary stuff, all these questions, these questions that lie in the subtext of just like, it's so rewarding. There's reasons why it's so rewarding or it feels so good. There's a reason why different things feel so good. Like it's hard to get into people's heads. Everything has an answer. Everything is quantifiable. You can understand why anything occurs, please.
No, I 100% agree with you on that. And you kind of made me think when you were talking about that client, when he was talking about, being mad for 2 hours. It's something that I made, I think it was one of my Instagram stories this past week, right? Is you didn't have a bad day. You had a bad 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then you decided to indulge in it. You decided, instead of stopping just for a second and writing it down you decided to just replay the scenario in your head. Like, it's that circular pattern, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D. And now the whole day you're focusing on A, B, C, D. But if you just stop and do E, which is maybe writing it down, well, now you can let it go. That's self-awareness. Why am I feeling this way? Why am I so pissed off right now? Let me write it down for a second. Oh man, that's really stupid. Like, why am I letting this scenario or this person take my peace? Because if someone takes your peace, your purpose, because we all have a purpose in life. And every day we should be working towards that purpose. But if we don't have peace, we can't fulfill our purpose.
There's a line I quite like, and I like to remind clients of this, and actually to frame this first. We live in a culture where, again, this is one of the major problems I have with my clients, is they stopped being curious. They stopped trying to figure this out. And what's even worse is this culture has told us that, don't even try to figure it out. Yeah, some people are just depressed. Some people are just anxious. Don't even try to figure it out. Yeah, that's just how it goes. And yeah, you'll have to learn to deal with it. Do some breathing exercises. And there's no trying to figure it out. So one of the lines that I tell to my clients, I'm kind of jumping ahead here with this, is have very little tolerance for feeling like shit. You become too used to it. You don't have to be anxious. Try, and the way you were saying it echoed of this. Go to your journal. What made me so anxious? What was the trigger? What was the association being made if it is an irrational anxiety? What happened there? Just try to start learning. Do a little detective work. Try to see the parts that are actually there. There is information there if you start to journal about it. If you start, we might just feel so anxious and we go, oh yeah, anxious, anxious, anxious. And then somebody might note that we're feeling anxious. So they drag us into a conversation. They say, why are you feeling anxious? You say, well, I don't know. And they say, well, no, why? Why is that? And you go, well, I don't know. And they say, tell me what happened. And you say, well, my girlfriend mentioned this thing, or, I have a lot on my radar today. I've just got a lot on my mind. Look at the connection that can be made there. Why would having a lot on my mind make me anxious? Or why would my girlfriend saying that thing make me anxious? So this line, have very little tolerance for feeling like shit. That's to say, when we act in a way that we didn't like, and with reactivity, we snap at other people or push other people away. When we engage in compulsive behavior, maybe we watch something we know we shouldn't have, whether we drink or smoke or gamble or watch pornography or overeat or whatever. When we have a lot of anxiety, when we engage in behaviors related to that anxiety or depression or any of these other factors, try and figure out why. This isn't a state that you have to be in for the long term. It might take a little figuring out. It might take a little detraining of your brain, but it doesn't have to be this way. So stop acting as if it does. Have very little tolerance for it. And when I say tolerance, I want to make this super clear. I usually have to make this clear with clients. I don't mean be hard on yourself. I don't mean, what's wrong with me and what the hell's going on? I go, try and figure it out. Be curious. That's probably the better line I could be saying here, is be curious about why you feel badly. But I say, have very little tolerance for it. It doesn't have to be this way. Do something about it. That's how you handle everything else. That's how you handle feeling badly. Oh, okay, I got to roll on the lacrosse ball a little bit. Or, no, my car's been, doing something wrong. I got to go fix it and deal with it. My boot is leaking. Okay, I have to get a new shoe, or I have to, patch that piece up. When it comes to your behaviors, do the same thing. When it comes to your emotions, your cognition, your psychology generally, do the same thing. Have very little tolerance for it going badly. That's to say, notice when it goes badly and do something about it. And I know I'm saying this over and over and over as if I've explained what you can do. We'll have a whole episode for that, hopefully.
Yeah, but you know what? You have to keep saying it over and over and over and over again. Like, you have to, because we're so used to sitting in shit that you don't even notice the smell anymore. You don't even notice the discomfort anymore, right? And then when you're asking them to do the work that would fundamentally change their scenario, that would better their life in a relatively short period of time. I mean, if you diligently worked at it every single day, and I always make the comparison, when I got my correctional plan from my parole officer while I was incarcerated, it wasn't like, well, I'll do it this day, but I won't do it this day. I'll do it this week, but I'm not going to do it this week. What do you think my chances of getting out are going to be? Slim to none. Because at a certain point, my desire not to follow my correctional plan, there's going to be repercussions. And then if nothing changes, well, nothing changes. Yeah. And then you have people sitting there and they're always going to say, well, I can't. No, you can. You're just having trouble with it. But it's hard. No, it's unfamiliar. Change your language. Stop making it like it's impossible. If it's easy, then that's familiar. That's why you're sitting in your shit. I'm asking you to do something that's unfamiliar. I'm asking you to address your things. Yeah, but that's hard. No, you're just not used to doing it. And it's like people who justify, well, I'm fat because of my genetics. No, you're fat because you don't count calories, you don't move, and you don't put the fork down when you should. Probably because you're using food as a coping mechanism. Yeah, but that's how my parents raised me. But at a certain point, you become an adult, and now you're responsible for what you put in your body. So maybe you weren't responsible when you were a kid because you can only eat really what your parents feed you, much like the abuse, much like all the shit that we go through when we're young. But at a certain point, it becomes your responsibility for what you eat, what you feel, how you heal. I know that word, but like it's all on you. So stop pointing the finger and realize while you're pointing the finger at everyone else. There's, as my grandmother always said, Tyson, every time you point the finger, there's 3 fingers pointing back. Man, was she ever right? It's always us. We're always responsible for it.
Accountability, certainly. And that's the same thing here.
Yeah, I've talked about this in one of the other episodes I think it comes out, I think it's tomorrow's episode that drops, where just people will blame everything. And especially guys, it'll when guys are sitting with me as we're about to do coaching, why are you struggling? Oh, it's, I don't have time because of my wife or my job or my kids or this or that. So are you cool would you tell them this face to face? Well, no, I don't mean it like that. Well, then how do you mean it? You're using it as a justification. You're using it as an excuse, but it's a really bad one because it's not the truth. And facing the truth, I think, as men is something we're just not good at, because then that's acknowledging we have a weakness.
I completely agree. And I would also say, what's a guy to do when they don't understand what can be done? When it's pulling something out of the ether. When any therapist you have seen has been borderline useless. When therapy doesn't seem like an option. It doesn't even, it's not even a thing that can be quantified. You see this in the physiological realm as well. People whose knees hurt, perhaps most people, I don't know, don't even try to figure it out. They just go, yeah, my knee hurts and it's just going to hurt. There's no way to understand why that might be. Yeah, things just come out of nowhere sometimes. People are believing in magic, effectively. They're believing that something can come from nothing. And if there's one thing that I can really try to reinforce, it's that that's not the case. Get curious. Try to figure these things out. You can understand why you engage in all kinds of other behaviors. And I know it seems like it's been a tease a lot of this session, geez, that's a slip of the tongue there. But this video, that's how I usually speak with my clients. I know it might seem like a tease with this episode, but hopefully in another episode, it'll just be nuts and bolts, first session. What do we do? How do we understand this? How can we move forward? Because there are fundamentals here which I just don't hear talked about with other people. And I'm not trying to bait and switch. It's I have really negative things to say about the state of my field, and not to keep harping on that.
No, but I think this is a perfect kind of point to say that we will definitely be back. I hope we really piqued the attention and
I know
kind
it's
of
been a little tease.
whet the appetites of the listeners to get them kind of ready for what is to come, right? Is to understand that everything in life is going to come down to the work that you are willing to put in. And I love the fact that as a psychotherapist, you're all about educating your clients. Again, when we get a coach, if a coach asks you or a physiotherapist or anyone asks you to do something, the client has the right to ask why. Why? Ask the specialist you're working with, why am I doing this?
Yes.
What should I expect to see if I make a concerted effort into journaling or into this rehab movement or into this, whatever it is, because I've got to invest time, energy, and money. What's my ROI?
Yep. Why
am I doing it? So guys, stay tuned where he's going to go into the nuts and bolts.
It'd be my pleasure.
And give you hopefully a concrete outline as to where you can start. We know journaling is critical, but where to start? And Casper, Vatras, I want to thank you so much for coming on today, for sharing not only your time, but your expertise with those that I want to help, the audience that I want to help, and that I know you want to help. This is why you picked this field, is wanting to help men because, well, a lot of men are struggling right now.
That's all I want, man. No ulterior motives. Giving free resources. I have free resources for my clients. Not that I'm trying to make anyone my client. It's all about giving. And when we get to the evolutionary psychology stuff, that'll become clearer. So thank you for having me on, man.
Thank you again for giving. I really appreciate your time and all your knowledge and information today.